We've been talking about you.
Okay.
Yeah. We saw your video, the whole group saw your video from the TED Talk, and we learned about the Shrikes and how they do and what they do and why they do it.
Right.
And so I'm going to start out with the first question today. We've already got some people in the group that have got some questions for you. But one of the things that usually happens in January is people decide they want to improve their lives. They want to lose weight or they want to gain health, and sometimes they don't know how to go about doing it. And I know you do a great presentation with Chef AJ about cleaning out your environment. So that's my first question is, how do we go about cleaning our environment and making our environment right for the success that we want to have?
Well, actually, so it's a very good question, but I actually want to start with a little bit of a different tack on that. The most important thing that people need to do necessarily before they clean out their environment, cleaning out your environment is sort of maybe more of an advanced phase move. When people are beginning and they're trying to get on a track of a healthier lifestyle, the most important thing that they need to understand is that they need to base their diet around starches. That's actually the single most fundamental mistake in dietary understanding today. So the other things are important later, maybe, but the most important thing that people need to do is they need to understand that if you're eating large amounts of starch, essentially breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or maybe it's twice a day that people are eating, that this is what will pull the junk food or unhealthy food out of your diet, is the inclusion of large amounts of starch. And people have, by starch, we mean rice, beans, potatoes, corn, oats, pasta. Those are the starches. There's starch molecules in those foods, and those molecules are human beings are super well adapted to the starch molecule. They actually have, I think, 27 different genes code for the enzyme amylase that is going to be in your saliva to aid in the digestion of starch. So our ancestors have been eating starches for a great long time. We're built for it. And when you're not eating starch, you're eating something else. And that something else is going to be very rich food that's not going to be conducive to your health. The starch, people are afraid of starches because they've heard that starch, i.e. like in a potato, is like sugar and it will make you fat. This is not true at all. This is a huge misunderstanding. Starches are, they run from an average between about 300 calories a pound to about 500 calories a pound. This is very, very low calorie density. The average calorie density of the average hunter-gatherer is about 700 calories a pound because it includes meat, honey, nuts, etc. Some very rich foods. The starches are on the low end of calorie density. So potatoes are 375 calories a pound, which means that the average person would need to eat 6 pounds of potatoes a day in order to survive, which is huge. It's way more potatoes than you're going to eat. Beans are about 400 calories a pound. You'd have to eat 5 pounds of them cooked, etc. The squashes are 300 calories a pound. Oatmeal is 325 calories a pound. Rice is 500 calories a pound. The starches are low calorie density foods of essentially the perfect variety for human nature. And so the most fundamental move that you need to know as you begin a new year is that that the diet and the dishes that you eat need to be built around the starches. If you do that, when you push those in, the other stuff is going to come out in a compensatory fashion. That's going to lead you in a very good direction.
You have a checklist that you go by that's starch, 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 veggie, fruit,
exercise.
Right. Okay. Great.
Yes.
All right. Somebody else is going to come up for a question.
Hi, Doctor.
Hi there.
My question is, in your video, you talked about the tricks that you use, like drinking water for 24 hours. And the next one was juice. And I was curious why you said juice rather than whole fruit or natural fruit. Would fruit be better or?
No, not better. The reason is that when we're pulling all of the salt and the fat out of the diet, and actually there's a little bit more to it. Sometimes what you want to do is to have a different sensation in the digestive process, and when you're eating, you've actually got fiber in that, that's distending the stomach in a way that won't do that with juice, and that can essentially be a classically conditioned event that can stoke more hunger. So sometimes essentially juice can slide past that process, and the person can not particularly feel hungry, and they can still be getting two things. Number one, they could be getting the sugar needed to not go into ketosis so that they're not fatigued and get headaches or anything like that from going into ketosis. And second of all, it's tasty because it's a high sugar concentration. It's actually tastier than, for example, eating the whole fruit. So it's a little bit of a treat while we're at this. This is not a problem in terms of people think that they have sugar problems. So people will, 1,000 people have told me I'm a sugar addict. No, I've never seen a sugar addict. Everybody that gets into issues with sugar is always eating a combination of sugar and fat. Sugar and fat in combination is what people are addicted to. Almost nobody is addicted to jelly beans or sorbet. It's always ice cream and chocolate, okay? And so juice can be satisfying for a short-term process because of the high concentration of the sugar. It can be tasty. It's not stoking a digestive process in the way that food would. So therefore, people can be willing to do straight juice for a day or two, which can help them resensitize to fat and salt that they are not getting. You could absolutely do the same thing with food, but you just might not be willing to. Okay, so that's the idea.
Very good, thank you.
You bet.
Good afternoon.
Hi there.
If a person decides they want to start going on a plant-based diet, would they notice a change if they went on at 50%, or should they start out on 80% plant-based? How would that work?
I want to distinguish two things: plant-based diet versus a healthy diet. So let's keep in mind that corn chips and beer is a plant-based diet, and so we cannot notice too much if that's what we do. But if you go towards a healthy diet, oftentimes people can feel a great deal better in a week. So it doesn't necessarily have to take long. And there's no recommendation for feeling like, we're not withdrawing from drugs. So it isn't like we have to, just go a little bit at a time and move this direction to let our body get used to it. Nothing of the kind is true. If you immediately went to 100% healthy plant-based diet, you'd be completely fine in the process, and you would feel better faster as a result of this. Now, depends on who you are, because the truth of the matter is sometimes people on their diets now, even if they're not very healthy diets, they feel pretty good. But a lot of people don't feel that good. Sometimes there's a considerable amount of sluggishness. There's a considerable amount of digestion and elimination processes that are compromised. So sometimes their skin isn't that great. They're just low energy. They're not getting that good of circulation to the brain as a result of a high-fat, sort of sludgy process that's leaving a lot of fat in the blood. In other words, there's a lot of reasons why when you clean up your diet, you may feel better pretty quickly. 80% is good. 50% sort of doesn't make any sense because now we want to think about what we mean by those numbers. I'm hoping that nobody is eating more than 50% of their calories now from animal food. If you are, that's unusual. That would be an unusually heavy animal diet. The average American eats about 43% of their calories from animal food. So, but the notion would be, you know, if you give up half of your animal food and eat more, for example, more starches, how about that? And the answer is that's good. And you will probably feel some results. It's likely to be more subtle. If you give it all up or almost all of it up, you will feel better faster. And so that's, you know, it's a nice experiment that nobody gets you to sign a contract that if you go 100% plant-based for a week, that you can never go back. This is not like a steel chute that we stuff people's heads in and trap them in like a cat to the vet, and then you don't have any freedom. So you can take a chance on something dramatic and wild, which is to go on a plant-based diet for a week or two and see what happens. Run an experiment and see what it feels like, and then hopefully you may feel much better, at which point your motivation to eat animal food, though it's still going to be there, may be much reduced, and the notion of animal food on a consistent basis or on a daily basis may become something where you really do feel, you know, literally on an hour-to-hour basis that you don't feel as good, which is how most of us are. Okay?
Thank you.
Very good.
Hello, Dr. Ornish. My name is Matt. Oh, hey, Dr. Ornish. My name is Matthew Rivera, and I've been battling brain cancer for the past 8 years, still fighting. And I'm curious, how much time should I spend? This is a psychological question, of course. I studied psychology, like maybe as I got out of, high school and everything like that. And the thing is I'm wondering, for mental brain training, exercise, and everything like that, how much time of my day should I spend on that?
How much time should you spend exercising a day? You mean mental exercises or exercise? Exercise is a fairly modest player in health. It's not nothing, but it's a distant second to diet in terms of its importance in health. So I would recommend that people spend 15 or 20 minutes a day getting some moderate exercise. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It could be inside their own home. It could be as simple as putting on some music and doing a little bit of dancing, or it could be as simple as just light calisthenics for 15, 20 minutes. These are a good thing just for a number of health benefits, balance, strength, and a little bit of aerobic stress. These are good things, but it's not a huge issue, and we know this from extensive research that a little bit of exercise is a good thing. A bunch more may be pleasant, and people may feel good, but when you total up the health benefits, there's a very steep diminishing returns as far as that goes. So people that are working out 45 minutes a day are not experiencing substantially greater health benefits than people that are working out 15 or 20 minutes a day. So that's one thing. Now the other thing, you're talking a little bit about, you're also asking about maybe brain exercises, or what's the second part of your question?
Sort of like I have an iPad, I play games, and what type of game should I be playing? I already know I can do crosswords and stuff like that and things like that, but yeah.
Yeah, actually, just my answer would be do whatever you feel like doing, because the brain exercises per se don't really have any substantial benefit. If you need some specific skill like arithmetic, then obviously practice on arithmetic would be useful. But for brain function per se on a more wide basis, general information processing in any domain is not going to be particularly useful. So the brain, when it comes to any trauma, it goes through its own very sophisticated healing process, and it reintegrates its ability to function as best it possibly can, and it does so naturally. So rehab processes have not typically been found to be useful to try to get people to do sort of brain drills. So my attitude would be just enjoy yourself and do what you want to do.
Hi there.
Hi there.
I think you just answered my question. I was going to ask you, how does someone like me that hates to exercise, can't get myself out the door to get to the gym, and just unmotivated. I'm eating right according to the way that you prescribe and other plant-based doctors. But the exercise part is just where I'm missing out. So you want me just to dance around the house and maybe do a little vacuuming and
good enough. Yeah, and it can. In other words, the best way to go about doing exercise is to do something that is repeatedly pleasant. Okay, so by having a little stereo or a little Alexa where you could get some music easily going, and spend 15 minutes or so dancing around to some music, that is perfectly excellent. What we're trying to accomplish there is the following: you get some of this by walking, but not as good as it would be if you're dancing around. The reason why is that when we age, what's happening is that a lot of times our environments get very, very benign in terms of movement. So we have very smooth surfaces, we don't have a lot of steps, and so as a result, what happens is that neurologically, we start to lose the ability to catch ourselves if we get caught off balance and stumble. So what you'll notice as you watch people age is you'll notice a period of time when they will start to walk differently, and they'll take very short steps. Okay, so it's not happening with you yet, but you can imagine a time in the future where you watch little old people, and they're very, very careful about how it is that they walk. They take like a little 1 foot steps or 8-inch steps. They step like this. And the reason they're doing that is that they inherently fear falling. And the reason why they inherently fear falling is because they have lost the ability to actually take a large, quick step one direction or another in case they stumble. So they're essentially trying to maintain great stability, because they know if they lose their balance intuitively, they're in trouble. They're going to land on an elbow, they're going to injure their back, they're going to break a hip. Something bad is going to happen if they fall. So the reason why we want to do things like dancing around or similarly to dancing around would be walking on an uneven surface like hiking. The reason why this is better than walking around the block is because you want to have the experience of suddenly lurching because you're off balance. And when you suddenly lurch to the left or the right, your foot has to take a large step quickly to one side or the other in order to catch your balance. That is precisely the movement that we need in order to stay upright if we're walking normally. We may stumble, we need to then reach very quickly with our foot to catch us. Okay? If we incorporate something like dancing, which involves large and sudden shifts of balance left to right with irregular steps, then what we maintain is a natural confidence that if we stumble, we're going to be able to catch ourselves. We have the quadriceps strength to catch ourselves with a great deal of force coming down on one leg or the other, as well as the coordination. That means that into your old age, then you do not fear stumbling. And when you don't fear stumbling, then you walk, then you maintain beautiful walking function into your old age. It's probably 20 years ago that I got to see, probably in one of his last performances, I got to see the mime Marcel Marceau. And he came to San Francisco, and a friend and I went to see him. And he was in his late 70s at that point. And I was mesmerized because this 78-year-old man moved like he was 20. Yet he moved like and I was astonished to find out that 2 or 3 years later he had died. It was like that was unbelievable, the spectacular youthful movement that he still had. And it told me a story, and that is that this sort of quiet physical infirmity that takes place with most people as they age in the United States is absolutely not necessary. And so one of the key points to doing this is exercise, and a specific type of exercise is exercises that cause you to have to catch yourself when you lose your balance.
That's good. Thank you. Another quick question. I was real surprised by what you said about brain games. Because I was reading a book by Dr. Neil Bernard, and I can't remember which book it was. Maybe it had to do with Alzheimer's or something. And he did say lumosity, could be helpful to some people, but you don't adhere to that opinion?
I don't even know what the word was. What would be helpful?
Lumosity is brain games.
Yeah, this is hope. Okay, and I don't believe that there's any substantive evidence to support it. I think that essentially new data flow into the brain itself. In other words, if you're staring at the wall and not doing much, that's not a good thing. But if you get out and walk around and shop, okay, and window shop and talk to your friends, then its new information flow appears to be the most important issue, not any specific little repetitive thing that people do. This has been a frustration with neuropsychological rehab for 50 years. So when people have experienced brain damage, then it has always been hopeful that just like rehab for muscles or rehab for musculoskeletal injuries, etc. The rehabs for those can be useful. The rehab for the brain has been surprisingly not useful. It appears that this tissue and its ability to maintain its integrity or to reintegrate is so incredibly specialized, it's basically entirely gene-driven. And so it essentially naturally maintains its function as well as possible. By far the most important thing in this is going to be getting good oxygenation and a low toxicity diet into the brain so that those tissues are as healthy as possible. That's more important than any kind of exercise of the tissues. A major issue is also sleep. And most people sleep okay, but some people short themselves of sleep fairly often, watching TV too late into the night, drinking coffee. There's going to be things that reduce the total quantity of sleep for people, and any artificial reduction in sleep is going to compromise brain function. And so these are the big issues, far more so than any exercises we could ever do.
Hi, Dr. Lisle. My name is Mark. I have a question for you. I heard before that sitting is the new smoking. Have you heard that before?
Oh yeah, that's a cute phrase.
And the reason I want to push this question out is this. I have to sit a lot because I drive long distances, not by the train, but by my car. Sometimes it's 1 hour, 2 hours to an appointment, and then we sit again. And then I have to go back home, and then I sit again in front of the computer. So that's a real issue. How do you counteract, all the sitting? Is that really a new smoking? Should I be really concerned? How do I interact that? And how does that affect my health? And what is the insight you have to get yourself outside of sitting? I mean, I heard dancing and exercising, but maybe a little more deeper insight.
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, sitting is not the new smoking. It's silly. It's unbelievably silly. So it's not. It's nowhere in the same class with smoking. It's think of it as 1% as problematic as smoking. It's not in the same league. The issue is that if you sit, say, for an hour, what's happening is that you can be lowering the amount of blood flow that would normally be going to those areas of the lower back. And when you do that, you can, repetitively over time, you can essentially be aiding and abetting a lack of health in that area. And if it has a lack of health and lack of circulation in that area for enough hours of your life, over a long period of time, then you can actually even wind up with injuries down there as a result of compromised function. Similarly to if you don't do any exercise at all, it's quite possible that you may get your bones pretty thin, and you may be more susceptible to osteoporosis, for example. So but this is minor league stuff. Now, I think it's probably a good idea if you're in the car for an hour, if you can do this, it's a good idea to stop maybe after half an hour or so, get out of the car and just stretch even for a couple of minutes. That will then restore a bunch of circulation to that area. And now we haven't sat for a whole hour. And then, so to break things up I would be thinking along the lines of about a 30-minute cycle. That, it doesn't have to be a big deal, but literally even a 1-minute break from sitting can be useful in terms of restoring some blood flow to that area. Also, many people nowadays, which is I'm sure going to be a good thing, will spend some of their time with work that they do standing. So the use of standing desks, for example, is a really useful thing. But in general, I would not be intimidated by the sitting. I would be thinking along the lines of, I don't want to be sitting for 1 hour stretches over and over and over again throughout the day. I would be looking to break those up into more like 30-minute stretches, with even a slight break being very useful.
So you're saying to be intentional, have strategy ahead of time, think through, okay, I'll be sitting, this is what I can do, so not just have a haphazard approach, but more intentional. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that be thinking about when you can, not sitting for a full hour, instead, finding even a 1 hour or even a 1-minute break in that process. So it's worth it if you're driving for an hour to somewhere, plan to take a break, halfway in between, just so that you give those structures in your lower back just a little bit of a break before we continue. That's the idea, and not religiously, but if you just do that more often, this is good for health in the lower back.
So I just keep getting, it's wonderful, it's all this amazing knowledge that you can do for yourself, but it's only you have to take those steps for yourself, but it's trying to share that with other people that haven't broken bad habits. For example, in this case, smoking is, I'm trying to share something right now with someone. And, when I read that, I never came across that. So how do I,
Smoking is its own thing. It's its own independent addiction. And it's the nicotine withdrawal is quite a fight. For people, it's very unpleasant to go through that process, and it's an issue that people, when they do stop, they're overwhelmingly likely to start again. So the average cigarette smoker has obviously attempted to quit, many hundreds of times and has failed. They have actually gotten through the nicotine withdrawals 8 times. 8 major attempts at stopping smoking is usually what is required to eventually actually stop. So very often people will stop for a year, and then they will start again, and then they will stop for 6 months, and then they will start again, and then they'll stop for 3 years, and then they'll start again. This is the typical pattern. This is an extremely difficult drug to get free of. Smoking is completely dominant with respect to health. Smoking is vastly more destructive to a person's health than a bad diet. So when anybody comes to me looking to try to get healthy, and they are smoking and they have problems with their diet, I tell them, I don't even want you to think about your diet. Your diet is not important here. The most important thing that you do is to stop smoking. So we do everything we can possibly do to get you to do that, because that is the dominant force in your health. So now, that journey of stopping smoking is a private, individual dogfight of the first order. If I were to go back in time as a very young man and I wanted to be rich, I would have been smart to invest in the tobacco companies. What a racket! Okay, what an incredible racket this is. So it's so difficult for human beings to manage this. So I hear what you're saying. There's been many studies about trying to figure out how to help people do this. Everything from shock therapy to diet therapy to different drugs to block the effects of the withdrawal, etc. The truth of the matter is, it's tough business, and anybody that's ever going to try to stop smoking as a result of their doctor or anybody else coaching them is very likely to fail for a long period of time after they even begin a serious process of attempting to get off of it. So chit-chatting with our friends about this is we're trying to share with them, hey, what can I do to be helpful for you if you're trying to stop? That's great, but the truth is that if they're trying to stop, they're probably at the beginning step of a 5-year journey where they will probably not succeed. Okay? So I don't spend too much time talking about this other than to tell people that don't even think that there's anything as important that you could do for your health that even comes close to this. This is about a 10-year reduction of your life expectancy. Diet is about 3.6 years. So smoking is the big lion in the living room, and so and there's no trick other than sheer guts to get it done.
Would you say your feelings are attached to smoking? Very much so. Feelings are attached to smoking?
Well, it's drug addiction. So it's a drug addiction process, and the withdrawal is very disturbing. And the reintroduction of any drug once you're in withdrawal is a huge relief to the system. It's an immediate major relaxation. And so that's how smoking works. It's not working in terms of ancillary emotional responses in life. That's not where it's working. It's working its destruction and its difficulty through a constant process of a timing mechanism of classical conditioning where the person is expecting to get a dose of this drug about every hour, and if they don't get it, they go into withdrawal. And then by using a cigarette, it takes them out of withdrawal, and it's a tremendous relief. And so if they don't get it, they get anxious and they get agitated. Smoking is what it is. We've all watched it. We see people struggle with it. It doesn't matter how brilliant you are, and oftentimes it doesn't matter how determined you are. This is one difficult weed to pull, and there's no easy trick.
Okay, thank you very much.
Very good, thank you.
I just want to say I love your drawings. Drawings are wonderful. I watched your interview with John McMahon on the I Thrive series, and I was really touched and I cried during that interview because I have an addiction to dark chocolate. And it's so severe that I can't check out at any store without buying it. Do I have a tapeworm or a parasite in me that's making me crave chocolate? And how can I sever that relationship? Or is it a good relationship?
Well, if you're going to be addicted to something, that's not a bad thing to be addicted to. So yeah, on a range of scales from of destructive issues, this is pretty benign. Okay, so I would say I wouldn't be worried about that. I'd be worried about making sure that the major part of your calories are coming from the whole natural starches, and that, you know, rice, beans, and potatoes, etc. And if you've got a dark chocolate addiction, we'll just live with it.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Is there any way food can fight hearing voices or siren-like sounds or paranoia?
In general, I would say no. Okay, but I wouldn't expect food to have any substantial impact on this. Now, I will say something else, and that is these types of symptoms have sometimes been found to be responsive to long-term water fasting. So there's another trick in the drawer from the natural world that may be useful. These kinds of experiences could be coming from a variety of causes. The most significant of which is schizophrenia. And so, if a person is not schizophrenic, but they're simply hearing some voices and they're having some paranoia over those, then this is a much lighter weight problem than the problem of schizophrenia. So, however, the problems can be coming from, you know, a variety of neurological disorders could give rise to this sort of thing. But the scariest thing that that these symptoms suggest, so if this is someone you know or that you've heard about, the scariest part of this would be schizophrenia. And it turns out that long-term water fasting looks to be helpful in mitigating the symptoms of schizophrenia. This is not known by modern psychiatry, but this was discovered in Russia in mid-century, the mid-20th century, as they used water fasting extensively in the treatment of schizophrenia. And they got surprisingly good results with this. So if the person that you're referring to has an interest and has enough stability and resources to and would have the motivation to pursue something like this, there's a couple of places in the world that specialize in long-term water fasting in the United States. They're True North Health Center in California, and Nathan Gershfeld's place called Fasting Escape also does this. That's in Los Angeles. So so there's some people out there that know how to supervise water fasting. Water fasting is spectacular in terms of its ability to unwind a number of pathological conditions. Cardiovascular disease issues, hypertension, diabetes. There's nothing as good as water fasting for most problems associated with dietary excess. And it just turns out, curiously enough, that schizophrenia and schizophrenic-like neurological disturbances look to be often helped by a period of water fasting. That typically those water fasts might last, 14 days to 21 days. This all sounds pretty outrageous, and to a standard medical doctor, they would think I had lost my mind reporting this, but I have not. I have been watching this process for more than 30 years, and there's been extensive research published around the world on the use of fasting. Fasting has also now come to the attention of major researchers in the United States who are working with us at True North Health Center. So it turns out that your question, it's not like it's a panacea for serious psychopathological conditions, but it looks extremely promising and potentially useful. And if I was a family member of somebody that had those issues, I'd look into it.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Doug Lisle.
Hi there.
I just want to thank you for coming and being with us today. I drove about 30 minutes from another town over, and I'm actually the mom of the young man who's been fighting brain cancer for 8 years.
Yes.
So he started at 16 with grade 3 anaplastic astrocytoma. About 2 years in, at 18, he said, I want to start fighting cancer with nutrition. I want to eat more plants. Will you help me? And like any good mom, I said, no. I said, I'm not going to change my whole, I'm not going to make 2 meals. So if you do it, that means I'm doing it. And I'm not going to buy all new food, cook different, and eat different if you're going to run off to McDonald's and get a Big Mac. So it was kind of like when he got the first dog, you know, I'll walk it, I'll feed it, I'll water it. Oh, no, Mom, I said, you'd have to be committed. I'll be committed. And he really has. And so we've been like 6 years this month, and eating predominantly plant-based, like I'd say 100% plant-based at home, and we do most of our eating at home. My problems come a little more with social situations. I would say 3 things, like one is travel, and another is just social settings in general, because I kind of value, I think I value those relationships with people more than what I put in my mouth. And then number 3 would be what I call food nostalgia, which is things like holidays and what grandma made, and you know, I have these memories. I still have like some cookbooks that I'm not using, but I can't get rid of, because it's like, well, what if one day, you know, and it's been here, it's been 6 years, you know. So I'll just let you take whatever, food nostalgia or whatever you want to take with that and run. And as far as the brain, he was kind of asking a lot of questions, you know. I know there's, you hear a lot, if people are doing Esselstyn for reversing heart disease, they're staying away from nuts and things like that. It took me about 5 years to really start cutting oil, I would say. Because in my mind, I was like, well, I've made so many changes, I can have this. So, but I knew that all these different doctors were saying it, and I could tell other people, but it took me a while to incorporate that myself, but we're doing better in that area now.
Great. Terrific. I can't remember. Did you have a question that I forgot?
Yeah, I talked a lot. Okay, well, I guess just in the area of food nostalgia, any advice there? In the area of social situations, holidays, food nostalgia, traveling, those temptation type times.
Yeah, I'm never worried about any of this. So the difference between being 100% perfect and being 80 or 90% is very small. In other words, the difference in your health would be very, very small effects. So I'm not worried about when people aren't perfect at all. I would say that in general, the idea is that when I'm in such situations, that the most important move that I'm making is to make sure that I eat plenty of whatever starches are available. So if I make sure that if there's rice, beans, or potatoes around, that I eat a healthy filling of those before I essentially and displace everything else to the point where everything else that I'm eating that may be naughty is not adding up to very many calories. So in this way, I simply make sure that transgressions per se are really fairly minor. That's the idea. And so there's no reason to suddenly be eating, you know, some massive serving of ham or cheese fondue. That just doesn't make any sense. But if you're at Thanksgiving dinner and you want to eat some turkey, remember that the most important thing we do is to have some mashed potatoes and some stuffing and some cranberry sauce and some vegetables with the turkey. And so the idea is to, this way I'm always just kind of diluting any naughty thing that I do by making sure that I'm mostly in the right at any given time. That's the idea. And, and if you don't do that perfectly all the time, that's fine. But the notion is if you use that as the general model, that the center of all of your dietary targets is the starches. If we do that, then we're always going to be safe.
And what about nuts and other type foods that other people would recommend for brain health? Is there anything that you would recommend food-wise for brain health?
No, this is all BS. Everybody's essentially going to sell you what's called a deficiency model of health. This is extremely attractive and very it's very intuitive for humans to believe in deficiency models of health, oh boy, you better eat nuts because it's really important for your health. That's bogus. There's nothing about nuts that's particularly useful for your health. Similarly, there's nothing particularly dangerous about nuts. So, so the idea that nuts are high fat and they're going to be a problem with heart disease, this is not true. Okay, so we simply there aren't any superfoods out there. What there is there's whole healthy food, and then there's food that's been processed, which is a bit less healthy, and then there's junk food, which has been really there's everything else, and there's animal food, which is mediocre. I actually know the players who have varying opinions on some dietary issues. I have some feel for where they have biases. I speak openly about what those biases are, and when I say that they're biases, they are because I'm a pretty sophisticated statistician. I was a professor for statistics at Stanford University. So when I have looked into the dietary issues and the stats, what I find is no superfoods and no dangerous foods in the plant kingdom. Okay, what I find is food versus processed crap. Okay, and the processed crap will have some negative effects on human health. They are not as great as most people think. So to just give you an example, the statistical difference between a healthy eater and a not healthy eater is 3.6 years. That's what it is. So to listen to some people talk, you would think it might be 10 years or 20 years. It's 3.6 years. Now, the difference in excellent function might be 20 years. That's where you see things. So you don't want to be 100 pounds overweight, type 2 diabetic with a walker at 60 years old, because you're looking at another 20 years of life and your function is going to be horrible. So function is important, but function you can assess quite easily just by looking at yourself and by moving around, walking around the block. So I don't live in fear of life and death issues around food. I want to aim at the starches, and I want to aim at a diet that is low in animal foods and has plenty of fresh food in it, and then I want to see how it is that I feel. So that I've now talked so far past your question, I can't even remember. I think it was just about holidays and miniature transgressions and traveling, and the answer to that question is just get a B. Just do a pretty good job, forget it.
I think we're just about ready to wrap up, but I would like to ask one favor of you to clarify about water fasting. And I know that when you were talking to the young lady about the schizophrenic type thing, that is under medical supervision. This is not something that you go off at home and fast for 20 or 30 days. It's under medical supervision. So what, one day at home, a water fast on your own?
one day at home isn't even what we would call fasting. Because what's happening is that, and it's perfectly fine to do that once in a while just for, if you want to help clear your palate, etc., it might be a useful thing. But the first day of water fasting is technically not even fasting because you still have glycogen stores in your liver and you have not shifted over to ketosis, which is really what's happening during water fasting, where it gets very interesting. So that doesn't even happen for 24 hours. So usually we would not recommend that people would fast on their own for more than about 3 days. And 3 days is, 3 days is quite a process. It can be valuable for people to do that if they want to do that once in a while, or they're willing to do it once in a while. I think there's some pretty nice health benefits. But if you're serious about ever doing a water fast, because you have some specific health goals that you would really like to see happen, there's nothing like water fasting, but you would do it under a place like True North or Nathan Gershfeld's place, where you've got a doc there that knows what they're doing.
What on the fasting at home up to and no more than 3 days? What if you're on medication? What if you're on insulin or cholesterol drugs or diabetic?
Yeah, you wouldn't fast on medication. Those would be medications where you would have to be safe to stop them for a few days, and that's what you would do. And a lot of medications you could stop for a few days without any big issue. But you would talk to your doc about it. And again, of course, then your doc's going to try to talk you out of it. But if you're, for example, cholesterol medications or type 2 diabetes, there would be. I'm not going to go on record here where I could be recorded and then I could get sued. The truth of the matter is that these medications are not particularly useful and not particularly important, and it's not like it's any big deal to be without them. That's different with respect to certain medications some medications are far more dynamic. If you're a type 1 diabetic, that's a whole different kettle of fish. So yeah. Anyway, for anybody that would be interested, if you're interested in fasting at all, I would want to be talking and consulting with somebody at least briefly. If you're going to do anything on your own with somebody knowledgeable, man, I would look to possibly write to either True North or Nathan Gershfeld at fastingescape.com. He's a young doctor that is very knowledgeable. He trained with us at True North for 3 or 4 years. And he is, that would be a resource for finding out more about that.
Perfect, thank you. I think Kathy wants to finish up.
Could you define water fasting? I don't understand exactly. Does that mean no water at all?
Okay, so what she misunderstood about the water fasting, and that meant that you would drink just water for 3 days or 1 day.
Yes, just water.
Just drink water.
Oh, you drink water.
Right.
That's what I mean.
And no food, okay.
No food.
Right, got it. Oh, that was great. There's so many of us that watch your videos, and when we get through, we just go, yes.
My pleasure, folks.
Okay, we got one last fun thing to do, but I want you just to explain this because Cindy's got something for you. And it relates to willpower, because we wanted to talk a minute about willpower. And what we did was we found the article you wrote about on nutritionstudies.org, and it was about willpower. And those 4 things you can do to strengthen your willpower: clean your room, eat something healthy today, exercise daily, get to bed on time. And, yes. It related that whole issue about willpower is not a fixed quantity within us. And I thought I had all the willpower I could possibly get, but now I find that there might be a way to boost it. So just something quick on that.
Yes, your willpower isn't what people think it is. It's actually, your willpower changes dramatically from hour to hour. And it has to do with, actually it's largely associated, strangely enough, with blood sugar levels in specific areas of the brain. And so when you work your brain hard, for example, if you can imagine being a customer service rep, those people deal with a lot of stress. And after about an hour of listening to phone calls and people complain, they can be fatigued in that area of the brain. They can literally have a lower blood sugar level in that specific area of the brain, and that can make them impulsive. And that impulsiveness, strangely enough, can drive a specific craving for sweet as opposed to salt or savory. It's as if the brain knows what it needs to do in order to recover some blood sugar levels to get back to normal function. So the notion here is that a couple of things. That's why there's, we have healthy snacks around to support our willpower. If you, I wind up counseling some people that are getting strange and amazing loops that are destructive, where they're trying to lose weight and they'll try to go for very many hours as long as they can go without eating. And what happens is that when they do that, their willpower is dropping by the hour. And then they're craving then very sweet things. And then they'll go binge on ice cream. And so then, of course, after they've binged on the ice cream, their willpower has now been recovered. But now they have done something exactly what they didn't want to do. And then the next day they start all over again and do the same thing. And so this is an example of a horrendous willpower mismanagement. That's sort of the cycle. So instead, what I try to encourage people to do is to eat starches. Okay? If they eat starches, what happens is the starch molecule winds up supporting blood sugar levels in the brain across several hours, and therefore supports willpower far more consistently. And that's what we want to do in general, is to be kind of running your life on the starches: rice, beans, potatoes, corn, pasta, and oats. Those are the kinds of things that we want to have repeatedly in our diet across the day. Those are the things that support our willpower in an excellent fashion.
Dr. Lisle, I wanted to tell you, thank you, because when I read your book, I've struggled with food issues my whole life. And when I started this journey, it was all about losing weight. I had no idea the joy and the happiness I was going to experience from eating this way. I actually call my food happy food. And I love eating it. And what really helped me the most is when you did all of that. I'm not a left brain person, so I won't remember. But when you did all that really cool stuff about explaining the 1 and 2 and the 3 and the 4, that literally helped me get rid of my guilt and shame. And I wanted to thank you for that, because for me, that is the biggest gift of all. And I appreciate that so much. So we have something very special for you. And let me show it to you, and then I will show it to everybody else. We have this beautiful t-shirt for you that has your 4 points of willpower. And let me show everybody else. Isn't that So thank you again for Skyping with us, and that I actually got to meet you, kind of, sort of. And I appreciate it so much. Thank
Very
you.
good. Thanks very much for having me.
We're going to say that to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.